Yeah, my name is Andy Dunham, and my wife Melissa and I own and operate Grinnell Heritage Farm just outside of Grinnell. The farm's been in my family since 1857, and I'm the fifth generation. My kids will be the sixth. It was a conventional row crop farm when I moved here about 10 years ago, and we have since diversified quite a lot out of both desire and necessity. Melissa and I are both fully employed on the farm and have no off-farm income. And other than her stint as an executive director for a local nonprofit, we have had no off-farm income since 2007. So, and that is without crop insurance. So if we pair this up with what Craig said, I think we can maybe show why we've managed to get by without crop insurance for that long, or at least hopefully give somebody an idea. So if I can get my slides to advance. Dun, dun, dun. Steve's probably saying I told you how to do that. Lower
Yeah, it's
corner,
that
figured
lower
it out.
left corner. There you go.
Just got it. Okay, so this is an aerial shot of our farm, kind of looking at it from the west. Our house is currently where those trees are. You can see a greenhouse here, a second greenhouse here, or cold frame, I guess. There's our packing facility. Our barn is up here, and then our fields kind of we run along. This is 16th Avenue there, and we border a development on that side. That's Penrose Street. You can see our grass-fed cows out on pasture there. That summer we had some hay and storage out here, and then we had vegetable fields kind of scattered all about. But our mission is to farm in a way that will leave it better for the next generation, giving our children, grandchildren, and beyond the opportunity to harvest the bounty we see on the farm today. Again, I said it was my wife Melissa and I. Here's a picture that's a little dated. My beard is definitely grayer than it was at that time. But where we market, we do have a CSA. We attend some farmers markets, Iowa City, Des Moines, and Cedar Rapids. We do wholesale or direct to grocer, I guess. So a lot to New Pioneer Food Co-op in Coralville, Iowa City, and Cedar Rapids. Some Des Moines grocery stores like Gateway and Whole Foods, and there are more. And we do a little bit of meat. We'll do some select broiler chickens every now and again, and our grass-fed beef. So for risk management, I kind of broke it down into these categories, and there are a lot of things to be aware of, and not all of them are weather related for sure. So like we have floods, we have droughts, you have the winter season, which kind of brings things to a screaming halt or prevents you from starting up. You have the market that you're dealing with, you have your staff that you're dealing with, you have yourself, you have, which I guess isn't pests, you also have pests. It did not include myself in there, or farm owners. That probably would go under employee. So we'll start with flood mitigation. And so some of the things we've done on our farm is really working with improving our soils. And so we are certified organic by MOSA, the Midwest Organic Services Association. And when dealing with organic farms, I think one of the biggest things you'll hear organic farmers talk about is increasing your soil organic matter, because it really does help your farm become much more resilient. And so through cover cropping, composting, crop rotation, and mulch, I think you can really work to increase your soil organic matter. And on our farm, the vegetable ground, we've seen a dramatic increase in soil organic matter over the years. But we do haul an awful lot of compost, and we use a lot of mulch, and we do a lot of these things to really work at building soil organic matter. In a flooded situation, high soil organic matter soils hold water better, so you don't reach the flood stage as quickly, and they tend to drain better. We also, for flood mitigation, we really like to have a diversity in our crop mix, so that you're not just relying on roots that might be prone to flood damage, or on crops that might be prone to flood damage. It's nice to have kind of different profiles out there in the field, so maybe the stuff that's above ground fares better than the stuff that's below ground. Field tile, with the flooding and the drainage, the lawsuit between the Des Moines Waterworks and some of the upstream drainage districts or whatever. I know field tile sometimes gets a bad name. But on vegetable ground, especially flat vegetable ground, I think that it's something that I would consider to be necessary in order to not lose your shirt. And all of our flat vegetable ground is tiled. In places where it is lower lying, we can do raised beds, and so we have a plastic, it's a raised bed shaper plastic mulch laying machine. And on certain fields that are particularly low lying, we tend to make raised beds there every year. And then you can plant, mildew and mold resistant cultivars. So like, especially on lettuces for horticulture crops, a lot of times you'll see that they might like have powdery mildew resistance or something, and that'll help you with wet weather. So we can touch on that later if you'd like to, Steve. Drought mitigation was the second thing I kind of talked about. And drought and flood are, believe it or not, we've had a year where we were considered, declared a federal disaster county for flood and drought in the same calendar year. But a lot of it boils down to soil organic matter again. You need to increase soil organic matter to become drought resistant or more drought resistant, I guess, because high soil organic matter soils hold water for longer. So you don't need to irrigate as often, and you don't have drought stress conditions come on as quickly. And it's the same kind of things, cover cropping, compost, crop rotation, and mulch all help to do those sorts of things. Crop diversity again comes into play. You don't want to only plant crops that are heavy water users. If you're in a drought situation, it's nice if you can kind of spread it out. There are certain crops I'm trying to think of a good example, like during the flooded years, some like beets, for example, can take drought pretty well. They have a nice big taproot, and you don't really have to irrigate them all that much. And it usually concentrates their sugar sleeve and tastes better in a drought. Whereas in a flooded situation, they might not fare as well. Irrigate in drought, if you have a drought situation, so you have to have adequate irrigation. If I go back a couple of slides, which I'm going to do because we're close, we have an irrigation pond that is right, you can see the tip of it right there on the other side of those trees. So we irrigate out of the pond, and we just dug an irrigation well in 2016. Oops, I went one slide too many. In 2016, we dug an irrigation well. In part because of the Food Safety and Modernization Act. It looks as though surface water is going to be much more strictly regulated, I guess, or looked at when you're using it for food production. And the well water is going to require less testing or fewer tests per year. And we kind of outgrew our pond anyway. It just wasn't sufficient for the 20 some odd acres of produce that we're growing. So we now have multiple options. And we do tend to irrigate using drip. Drip irrigation really does conserve water quite a lot. You're putting the water right where the roots are. And in our case, a lot of times you can totally keep water out of your wheel paths, so you're not watering where the tractor tires go. We also mulch to conserve moisture, and that just kind of putting straw or hay or even plastic mulch will help conserve moisture. And then in the winter months, especially during drought conditions, I tend to try to leave things in the field to catch snow, and I'll have a picture of that later. So think like asparagus, in a field of asparagus, don't mow it off in the fall if you're worried about moisture. Leave those asparagus tops in the field to catch snow, and you might be able to get 5 or 6 feet of snow to fall on it. And then by the time spring comes around, even if you have a low snowfall year, you'll still have plenty of moisture to get your asparagus going. Season extension is a way to really kind of make it so that you're not just at the mercy of, say, 1 or 2 months. So you're protecting crops from the weather either in greenhouses, cold frames, or using floating row covers. We do the floating row covers in the spring and fall sometimes, kind of depending on what we're wanting to do. So maybe you want to cover like your peppers in the fall if you have a once-off frost event, for example. Storage crops do kind of a similar thing. So, don't think about what's actually in the field necessarily, but maybe have the capacity to store vast amounts of crops. Like, potatoes, you can keep potatoes all the way until, February, March, April, even spring, if you have proper storage. And so you could grow a lot of potatoes in the field, dig them all, put them in storage, and then sell them through the winter. Crop diversity, cold hardy, and disease resistant cultivars help quite a bit with season extension. Red lettuces, like as a rule of thumb, probably fare a little bit better than some of the green lettuces to being frozen and then thawed. There are certain spinach varieties, that do better in the cold, certain Brussels sprouts or kale varieties that do better in the cold. Like we can take Brussels sprouts down to below 20 degrees, and as long as they thaw in the field, they're okay. Much below 20, and usually there's some damage and they don't store as well. For season extension, you also can do raised beds, which we do with that raised bed shaper and plastic mulch layer. So in the spring, you can really gain some degree days in the spring and even in the fall, but more in the spring. For season extension, you can plant windbreaks, and you also can transplant. So we do a lot of transplanting on our farm. Pretty much all of our crops that could be transplanted out are, and so we put out about 500,000 transplants a year that we start from seed in our greenhouse. And the nice thing about that is as soon as the outdoor conditions are favorable for that plant, we can set out a plant that's ready to go and 3 or 4 inches tall. So we're not having to seed it, think onions or something like that. We're putting out, onions from seed, typically by, the 1st of April. And they're already, 5 or 6 inches tall. So that covers season extension. Marketing diversification, what I'm kind of trying to get to there is don't put all of your eggs in one basket. It can be quite risky. Let's say that you're doing a really good job of selling directly to a grocery store, and then for whatever reason the management of that grocery store decides to go in a different direction, and 50 or 80% of your business could just evaporate overnight if you lose one account. And so we deliberately try to spread out where our produce is going. And so we do have the CSA, we have the direct to grocers, we have farmers markets, and we have wholesale where we're selling, to a middle person or a middle company, that where maybe our name doesn't stick with the produce all the way to consumption. Another way to look at it too is just like find what your niche is. So if you're right outside of Chicago and there's a really great market for leafy greens to restaurants, maybe fill that niche. Here in Iowa, I'm not certain that niche is as readily available for leafy greens like that, but there maybe is another niche that isn't available around Chicago. And then when you are doing your marketing, keep records and use them to make adjustments. And this is one of the things I love about being certified organic, is that many of the records that we need to make sound financial decisions are being kept kind of by organic default. And so we quite thoroughly look through those every year to determine what we're going to do for the upcoming year or 2 or 3. And so if we have a crop that we're suspicious maybe isn't making us any money, we can do an enterprise budget on that crop and change accordingly. And we've made many changes over the years by looking at our records and making sure that we're actually, turning a profit on the crops that we're growing and selling. I'm going to throw employees and employee training into this. Steve and I were having a conversation right before the start of this, and we've kind of determined that when you're having to train someone, it ends up costing the farm business quite a bit of money because maybe they're not going as fast or doing things as well as they will a few months into working for you. And you're having to spend a fair bit of management time going over something that the more experienced staff already know how to do. So we really like to have people come back. So we really focus quite a lot on employee training. It's also important from a food safety standpoint, making sure that you're not exposing yourself to undue risk, where you're opening yourself up to either making someone sick or a lawsuit or having someone get injured. That would be the personal safety, I guess. So like an example of that is we do have in our employee manual, we have a number of training pages that talk about like tractor driving and equipment using. And so we have 3 levels of tractor drivers on the farm, either 1, 2, or 3. If you're a level 1, it means that you just don't do it at all. Level 2, you're okay to just drive to and from the field. And level 3, you can use implements, but then I have to sign off on them to make sure that you're properly trained in on how to use those. And by doing some of those things, we're able to keep on top of who's been trained on what and hopefully limit our exposure to people either getting injured or sick or any of those kinds of things. Another thing that we really try to do, because we're talking about, Craig was talking about whole farm revenue insurance, and we really emphasize cross-training, because if I were to go down with a knee injury again or a back injury or something like that, if I don't have somebody able to do the tasks that I was planning on doing, we might well suffer financially quite a lot. So we try to make sure that at least 2, if not more, people know how to do any given task on the farm, in case of either injury or losing an employee. We've lost some people over the years that, and you definitely notice their loss. You're just like, man, he used to do that or she used to do that, and now it's not getting done. So somebody else has to step in. Pest management. So for on the horticultural side, we raise about 60 different crops. And so there aren't that many pests that afflict all of them. So I have a hard time seeing losing all of our crops to 1 or 2 pests. Grasshoppers do eat quite a bit if it's a bad grasshopper year. But to really manage pests kind of on a farm scale, crop rotation helps, especially with a lot of the soil-borne molds and fungi. Cover cropping helps quite a lot with pest management. So for example, we raise quite a few carrots, and root knot nematodes can be a problem, and they are suppressed by sorghum sudan grass. So we, in our rotation, try to always follow a big carrot planting with a sorghum sudan grass cover crop to help suppress root knot nematodes. We do have some root knot nematodes on the farm, and they have never been at a threshold where I've been really concerned, and I'd like to keep it that way. Another thing, that being certified organic, it's not necessarily in the organic standards, but having beneficial insect habitat on your farm or on our farm, it's nice because it does reduce the need for pesticides, and you can increase pollination on things like winter squash or some of those things that are pollinated by bees. Eggplant, for example. If you have a lot of bumblebees, you can definitely increase your pollination levels in eggplant. An anecdote about reducing the need for pesticides. We put in beetle banks, and you'll see a picture of that coming up, a number of years ago. And we used to have to do some sort of pest control for Colorado potato beetles because we raise a large number of potatoes. And the last 2 years, we haven't had to do anything because the number of ground beetles that we now have because of those beetle banks tend to keep them in check. We might see a few Colorado potato beetles, but the ground beetles eat them, which is pretty awesome. Pest management too, like the soil health and increasing organic matter, there are very few pests that become more of a problem if you increase your soil organic matter. There are some. You can get scurf in sweet potatoes, for example, but increasing soil organic matter for the most part is a good thing. And we do really try to limit damage to our living soil. We look at it as being alive, and so not trying to reduce tillage, don't do it very deeply. So we still use a rototiller, but our soil organic matter levels have gone up enough, and our tilth has improved enough over the years that instead of having to I can set my depth gauges so that I don't go more than about 3 inches deep. So I'm more or less just kind of skimming the surface, and the microbial community that's living in that soil is able to repopulate that soil surface relatively rapidly because I haven't turned the whole soil over, or the whole profile over. So one of the reasons, this is something that comes from a PFI slide I put together a number of years ago talking about extreme weather. Why did we adopt all of the above risk management strategies? And it's because we have been declared a federal disaster county in Poweshiek County many, many times since 2007. And so it's nice to know that we've tried to become, or plan for being able to make it through some of these events and have it not just ruin our entire business. So here is a picture of the flood of 2008. So this is relatively early on in my farming here in Grinnell. So our soil organic matter levels hadn't really gone up all that well, or all that much, and we were still using my grandfather's old 4-inch clay field tile, some of which were plugged, and I didn't know it until this event. But what you're looking at there is actually a field that was planted, and this was like 2 weeks into it. So we were standing in water like that for quite a while. We lost pretty much everything out of that field. There's a field of garlic and onions where I have a sump pump running. You can kind of see the orange extension cord in there. Let's see if I can point it out right there, kind of snaking towards the shovel. And that garlic looked great until it dried out, and then it looked like this. And you can see that's pretty characteristic of low soil organic matter soils. After they dry out, you get the huge plating on the surface and large surface cracks. Oops, don't need to point that out, I guess. Here I'm standing. This got planted right before the rains kind of started, and that was the field that was more or less underwater. And you can see that ground, it took a few years to recover from that. That was where I had a salad mix planting, and that was all up and looked great until the flood hit. I think we had 13 inches over a weekend. Was the kind of the worst part of that flood that year. That was when Cedar Rapids got flooded really badly. I had some carrots that were in the field, and you can see they succumbed to mildew after the water receded. And basically all of them, they just kind of turned to mush underground. We lost quite a few thousand pounds of carrots during that event. And I'm showing these pictures because this is kind of like, I don't like to see this. And so if I want to farm in such a way that I don't see something like this very often. And so it like these kinds of events make me maybe more cautious and or hopefully smarter. Okay, so that was kind of why. Now I'm going to show some of the diversity. So we have, this is an example of a deconstructed CSA share of ours from likely a early winter share. So we're still pulling lettuce out of the field. This would be in November. So we have carrots out of storage, shallots, leeks, rutabaga, beets, spinach, a couple of types of lettuce, cabbage, winter squash, garlic, potatoes, and parsnips. And many of these things would have come right out of the field. So about the only things out of storage at that time of year would have been the garlic and onions and probably the carrots and the potatoes, but the cabbage and the winter squash, I guess, the cabbage, the parsnips, the leeks, the spinach, the rutabaga all would have been pulled that week, I would say, through some of those season extending things that I talked about. Here's another season extender, is starting in transplants. Each one of these trays you see starts 200 plugs. So each one of these trays there is 200 lettuce plants ready to go out. And we do transplant quite a lot. Here you can see an example of, I talked a little bit about the raised bed shaper plastic mulch layer. This is a water wheel transplanter behind the tractor there, and it looks like we're putting out summer squash plants. And here you see an example of that white sheet is the floating row cover that I talked about. We'll actually pull that over there. That's mostly for excluding insects. But it also can be used to extend your season in the early spring and late fall. So you're going to get warming along the edges of those beds as well. And the plastic will help conserve moisture. Here you can see, what was I showing by this one? I think you're seeing the height of those beds. We tend to go about 4 to 5 inches or so. But you can vary it based on your equipment. And here's what a field of peppers would look like at the end of the year. So they've totally canopied over. You can see the plastic sticking out the end here, kinda. Get my pointer to work. There we go. And the drip tape is buried right down the middle of that, so it's underneath the plastic. And we only raise a few acres that way. Most of the stuff we're doing is on bare soil. It's just the crops, like getting colored peppers in this climate, you really do need to extend your season a little bit in order to make money doing it. Just planting them on flat ground and trying to sell into the wholesale market, you just don't get enough volume to make a go of it without extending your season by a few weeks. So here's a field of strawberries, also on raised beds but no plastic, and we do that in order to just keep them up out of the flat ground. I find that we don't have nearly the fungal issues if we put them on raised beds. So those are on raised beds. And the yellow balloons are bird scare balloons to keep the birds out of the strawberry field. Here's a better picture of the drip tape. If you're not familiar with drip tape, there are numerous resources out there. I'm not right on it. There we go. But it emits water, depending on the kind that you buy. It can emit water every 4 to 12 to 18 inches, depending on the type. And it'll give you kind of a constant flow over a given length. On flat ground, a lot of them you can run lengths up to 600 to 1,000 feet. And they make some pressure compensating drip tape for hillier ground too. Here's the picture of the Beetle Bank that I talked about for helping with pests. So this is one of my favorite features of the farm, which is kind of strange that it is. You can kind of see it here. It's a bank of native bunch grasses that runs down the middle of a field. We have 2 of these, likely to add a few more in coming years. It's on a raised bed so that the beetles, which are ground nesting, don't drown during heavy rain events or heavy snowmelt. And they only overwinter at some of these species only overwinter at the bases of native bunch grasses. And so we planted, and this one is mostly big and little blue stem and Indian grass. And then we transplanted, you can see our drip tape is right here. We transplanted right into this raised bed with no plastic. And then we cultivated it like a vegetable crop. And this was actually the first year of growth of those grasses, started from seed. Since then, it has filled in with some other plants. So there's like goldenrod in there now, and some of the like New England aster, which are good for other beneficial insects, and we've just kind of let those go. I have selectively burned it a few times, not the whole length because I don't want to kill all the beetles. But these are some of the strategies that we can employ to really reduce our need for pesticides. So, and we've actually witnessed that it does seem to work. Here's a picture of it with carrots. This was a different season, same beetle bank. Right here, it's kind of later in the season. You see carrots on either side. So as we've done some of these things, here's a praying mantis, which is a non-selective beneficial insect, so it will also eat your other beneficial insects. We really enjoy finding these. They really seem to like the cole crops in the fall, and they lay their eggs on the undersides of leaves, and it basically looks like spray foam, like these little gray splotches of spray foam. But it's not uncommon for us to see 50 to 100 of these in a given picking morning. So it's just kind of fun to watch them go after stuff. Here's another picture of row cover. If you're not familiar with row cover, this is on the inside of a high tunnel, and so we're covering. In this instance, I think we have it. It looks like we have it hooped, so you can see a hoop right there to keep the row cover up off of the crop. That particular season, likely it was spinach or something like that under it, or head lettuce, and that really allows you to extend that season even longer. I know Jill at Bluegate Farm does quite a lot of this in order to harvest greens really late into the either into the winter or even the next season. You do have to pull it off, and it does have to be above freezing for you to be able to harvest. So you really have to watch your timing on when you pick things. But there are a number of people that without supplemental heat are able to pick greens, into January, February. I talked about cover cropping. This is a really old photo of a PFI cover crop trial that we did. So we have buckwheat here. This was a failed attempt at, I don't remember what that was that didn't work that year. But the buckwheat is nice because it gives beneficial insects like bumblebees and honeybees. It gives them a food source, and it's quite fast, so it ends up smothering weeds. So here's the picture of the actual trial. So here was the buckwheat. I don't remember. I'd have to ask Sally, I think, to figure out what that was. This was Japanese millet, I think, and then over here we had sorghum Sudan grass. I want to say this might have been cowpeas. And so we did four cover crops side by side by side. And this I mowed off because the weeds came up because there was nothing there to smother them out. We now have kind of settled into a routine of raising about 3 to 5 acres of buckwheat a year, in part because we have a neighbor has some honeybees on our property that he manages, and it's really nice to take some buckwheat honey off. And it is a really nice smother crop for weeds. But it's not the best at building soil organic matter. It is kind of nice at building or making the soil nice and and friable or loose or whatever, so you can, whatever follows buckwheat, usually it's pretty easy to plant into. Things like sorghum sudan grass are much better at building soil organic matter, especially if you can get good root growth in addition to good top growth. I talked a little bit about catching snow. So here's that same beetle bank that I showed earlier where we had the carrots, and I'm guessing that on either side this is the year that we had the carrots. But you can see just by having a little bit of something sticking up, the amount of snow that you can catch. This is a yardstick stuck in the snow, and I want to say it was over a foot deep, and almost everywhere that there was bare ground there was nothing. And so in our field right now, we left a lot of residue in the field even here for 2017 or the end of 2016. And my neighbor's soybean field to the north, we've been really warm. He has, like, there's just nothing. It's just, it's just bare dirt basically. And in our fields, we still, even with all that warm weather and rain, we still have pockets of snow. So it does a good job of kind of moderating the fluctuations in soil temperatures and also getting some snowpack for moisture in the spring. This is kind of what most of the fields look like this year. So you can see by leaving, this is kale stubble, that you really catch a lot of snow. You might be adding a couple of inches equivalent, especially in a drought year. If it's super wet, maybe you're going to want to pull them out if you can do it without causing soil compaction. But we tend to leave it and then pull them in the spring. And it is nice to really bank that soil moisture at that time of the year. So I think with that, Steve, that's all the slides I had, and I kept it to about a half an hour. If anybody wants to contact us, go ahead and go through our website. We have a contact us page at grinnellheritagefarm.com. Steve or Kathy, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Andy. That was really great. Definitely a holistic approach to risk management. So nice information to share next to the whole farm revenue protection from Craig's presentation. But yeah, Kathy.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really touch on, if that's okay if I interject, I didn't really touch on whole farm revenue and like specifically for our farm. We have looked at it, but the threshold of loss, and I know Craig went into that in better detail than I ever could. The threshold of loss being what it is, and the premiums being what they are, even with government help for being a diversified farm, we've always felt that it's been more money than we would like to shell out for what we'd be getting, I guess is how I'd say it. Like, you don't buy insurance to make money, but you need to be buying insurance thinking about how does this fit into our business plan, and it doesn't seem at this point in time to fit into our business plan.
Sure. That's good. So, yeah, Craig did cover a lot of that in his presentation. So Andy, the question that I had was when you had mentioned kind of as a protection from flooding. You'd mentioned that your fields were tiled, and then later you mentioned that they were the clay tile that was there from when your father or uncle or somebody had put that in a long time ago before you were farming. So have you put in any tile, or is this all leftover tile from before?
No, so we have put in tile. It was what my grandpa put in, and here this photo is kind of old, so like right here in the cow pasture, if you see that line that's kind of running there, that is a tile header that's leaving the farm. So all of this vegetable ground here that's flat is all we put tile in this section over here in 2009 after that 2008 flood. And then this over here where I have the pointer now, I originally had that in cow pasture, and we took that out of pasture and field tiled that in the fall of 2011. And especially with our soil type and our topography, we're pretty flat, especially where the vegetable ground is. If I had to do it over again, that's the first thing I would have done.
Okay,
I would have spent that money before.
Yeah, my initial reaction was just wondering. It seems like a big, expensive project, I guess. Did you look into whether there was any sort of funding for that, or is that something that you had to pull out of your own checkbook?
We just paid for it. I didn't look too much. We've done a couple of things through NRCS's EQIP program, but like my personality type, I'm much more likely just to want to do something than to
Yep.
necessarily go and fill out paperwork and then do it. And so I'm probably not the most knowledgeable about the other sources of funding that may or may not be out there.
Sure, sure. Well, Kathy, any other questions for Andy while we got him?
I know you asked about the cattle eating the kale. They will, but we don't let the cattle go into the vegetable fields at all because they
Hmm.
cause worse compaction than tractors do. We're on a bed system, and so I tend to be very, very particular about where we can and cannot drive in the field, especially if there's any moisture. And so we might straddle like a bed of carrots with an underminer or something like that if it's kind of moist, but we won't put any pressure in the bed. And I see that you say pull the kale and then feed it. Um, the reason that we do give them a lot of vegetable scraps and stuff, but by the time it gets through the winter, they aren't so wild about eating it if you pull it in the spring because there's usually grass and they'll eat grass over dried kale any day. Um, but you definitely could feed it. So we compost it. We have a giant vegetative compost pile that then gets
Oh,
hauled on the cow ground. So because we don't want to haul it back on the vegetable fields in case we don't completely decompose pathogenic stuff.
great. Well, Andy, thanks a lot for taking the time to do this. This is packed full of good information. For those of you who are watching this recording, like he said, go to grinnellheritagefarm.com to learn more about them. They've also got a great Facebook page, so you can check that out too. So, thanks, Andy, and thanks, Kathy, for tuning in.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a good day.